3000.
What he's doing, my name's Maloney. This is the 3000 podcast. I'm joined today by a podcaster, Mr. TD from the Toy Division podcast. Mr. TD, thanks for coming, man.
No problem. I was just complimenting you on how good a setup this is. This is way better than my iMac at home, just with a microphone. I've got a snazzy microphone. I said I was at somewhere called the Mug Off the other day, and they've got a super snazzy set up as well. And yeah, maybe I need to upgrade, but there you go.
I'm sure theirs puts mine to shame, but it does the job here. So yeah, I'm happy for you to come down, and I appreciate the kind words.
Sweet. I'm just looking around, just thinking, fuck, I need to upgrade.
So obviously we can tell from your accent you're not originally from Melbourne, even though this is your place of residence now. Do you want to tell us how you got here from wherever you've come from?
Yeah, so I grew up in the southeast of England. It's definitely not London. If anyone says, where are you from in England? I dare not say London, because they'll say, oh, I know England. And I go, where do you know in England? And they'll go, oh, London. And then they go, oh, you from London? And there's this big thing where growing up, especially as a graffiti writer, if you were from outside of the M25 or zone 1, 2 or 3 on the London Underground, you were a bumpkin. And then I moved to Australia because I have half my family live here. I moved to Australia in 2015, then lived in Sydney up until 2021, 22. Maybe that was because that was the COVID era, so I've obviously blocked some time out. And then I've been living in Melbourne ever since, and not planning on going back. But shout out to everyone who I saw in Sydney last week.
Was the Australian graffiti community welcoming when you came over?
I think so, yeah. I mean, this is the strange thing about graffiti. It's definitely a double-edged sword when it comes to, you can build a community, you can reduce loneliness, you can have like positive friendships. You know, I'm 40 years old now and I'm still developing positive friendships with people who do graffiti or are associated with the culture. But also there's that underlying part of like tough guy, tough person, tough girl culture, wanting to be, you know, just being part of your own crew, a lot of that kind of gang mentality. And that's what I always find so interesting about graffiti writing culture in so many ways. It's just such a contradiction or a paradox, whatever term you might want to use.
Yeah, for sure. And like it is really cool because you see people form friendships within those communities. There might be dudes that are 60 years old that are hanging out with guys that are in their early 20s, but they've got something in common. They paint together, they do creative shit together, which is awesome. Yeah.
I mean, again, it's one of these cultures that has so many positives, but also so many potential negatives because you can connect with people. And the other thing is, I guess, if you're that kind of person who does graffiti or whatever term we want to use, graffiti writer, stylized letter writer, whatever term we want to use, if you're really antisocial and not that friendly, you're not going to suddenly become mates with loads of people. And that's the thing I've always thought is, you know, wanting to be that tough person, wanting to be that person who's really staunch, whatever term we want to use, you're not really going to develop many positive relationships. I think I've developed way more friendships and stuff going around different parts of the world, different parts of Australia, and just being quite positive and not having to fit into that stereotype of being someone who wants to headbutt someone or kick him in the face at the first realization that they're a graffiti writer.
Yeah, totally. I think not just in art, but in anything, you get out of it what you put in. So if you're going to have negative vibes, you're going to find some negative shit. And if you've got positive vibes, you'll find some positive stuff.
Yeah.
And like, it's true for anything.
Yeah. And I think also the duality that I'm talking about, or the contradictions, is that many graffiti writers, as we were kind of touching on before we started recording, is a lot of us come from environments where there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of like, you've got to stick up for yourself or you're going to get your head kicked in. Not just through graffiti, just walking the streets, just getting jumped. I remember walking home from just like a thing when I left school. It was like a social thing, music thing. I don't want to say disco. I think they called it a disco. It was the 90s, so it was a disco, but like a mini rave. And just getting jumped by like 5 people for absolutely nothing. Having my head kicked in for nothing, just getting jumped all the time. And that made me change to the kind of person where I would actually start the fights. I would often want to be the aggressor. And then getting into graffiti, it was then like, oh, okay, so I've got to be tough. I thought I had to wear a tracksuit, wear a baseball cap, and fight people all the time. But I realized that was just kind of like a metaphorical and literal mask for my own insecurities and experiences of trauma through my life.
Yep. And so do you, from my personal perspective, I've got a lot of mates that are in the graffiti culture. There seems to be a common thread of trauma or how do I say it without being offensive to people? They're usually a bit left of center people in general. You've got to be against the grain to go out and want to write on someone else's thing. Do you find that there's like a common thread there?
I would say that, again, so through my work, I'm an occupational therapist. So when I say occupational therapy, I know I explained it to you earlier, but people often think, well, that means work. Because it's like, oh, what's your occupation? But it actually means anything that occupies your time. So it's washing, dressing, eating, drinking, socializing, being creative, having movement, sleep, all the different myriad of health, holistic health kind of thinking. That's what we would refer to in my profession as occupations. Now, if physical, mental health, social situation impacts on your ability to engage in your occupation. So, for example, if you're really mentally unwell, you might become very socially isolated and not feel like you're actually having creative expression. Also, your personal hygiene might go down the toilet and you're not doing much exercise. This is just an example.
But that becomes a cycle.
Yes. Yeah. So then an occupational therapist comes in and helps someone to find out what's actually meaningful to that person. What would they like to achieve? So it's not the treatment is being done to you. It's being done with you. It's changing that dynamic between therapist or clinician or medical professional and the person. Because often it's like, well, you're this specialist who has this title and I've got this and I'm going to talk down to you. And often people can just feel like, well, that was a fucking waste of time. So an occupational therapist, if they're doing true occupational therapy, helps someone to live the life they want to live, no matter what level of disease or diagnosis. It's not about a cure. It's about quality of life. Now, with that, I've then worked in the mental health field now for getting on for 15-ish years. And what was very interesting when I was studying, I kept thinking, wow, graffiti is a really broad and complex occupation that people engage in, because there's the social interaction, there's the creativity, there's traveling around, there's meeting new people, there's being social, also being antisocial. But I also saw a lot of my own, I mean, I'm a recovering addict, hardcore drug user, alcoholic. But I remember seeing, again, this duality I keep talking about, where it's like, well, graffiti is obviously giving people positive things, like a sense of community, creativity, belonging. These are terms that I'm using over and over again. But also it can then go the other way, where you're hanging out with a lot of other troubled young people who maybe haven't had great family situations, maybe they haven't felt like they've been listened to, maybe they've been labelled. So it's like, oh, you've got ADHD, you've got ASD, you've got ODD, oppositional defiance disorder, you've got the pathologizing of people's life experiences and how things are going. And then through that, I think that graffiti gave me like a purpose. It really helped me to develop a personality where I felt confident.
Yep.
And I think that's what can really be beneficial for people. And that's what I've been trying to change with Toy Division.
Yep. So it is really interesting how people could potentially feel insignificant or that they have weaknesses, but then they can go out, they can create a persona for themselves without actually physically talking to people. They can build that personal brand. I know that sounds bad, but that's what it is. When you get your name up around, you're building this brand that people believe. You know, you can be someone who you may not be in your actual self.
Yeah.
That would happen all the time, I'd imagine, and people would gain confidence from that.
Yeah. I honestly think it's such a complex life experience for many people, and some people dip in, like growing up in the very small little suburban outskirts. And I'm not going to say London, because anyone who's from London, that's not London, bruv. But that's because there's trees there. That's not London. Growing up, there was like quite a few of us, and skateboarding has a massive thing to answer for, because so many people get into skating.
Yeah.
And it's like, I got into skating, and then I got into graffiti. But it was like this group of us that I started going up to London and seeing these names like written, like words, and thinking, what the fuck is this stuff? Who is Fume? Who is Cozza? Who is elk, like seeing these names and just thinking, that is so cool. How can I be like that? And then realizing there was a whole worldwide culture around that. And then that was it. And I got very much tempted by the four elements, breakdancing, DJing, MCing, and graffiti. And it's tied all in together in that very kind of like package, very much like, oh, that's the four elements. But then I started to realize that people who have no interest in rap music paint as well. And it just keeps giving more and more to my life where I don't feel that I'll ever get bored of it.
Yeah. It's the four elements thing is really interesting because that's obviously where it comes from. But now we've had 50 years of hip hop. Obviously, people talked about that a lot this year. That everything has its own subgenres within these genres. So, like the four elements all have multiple sub elements within those elements.
Yeah.
And that's cool.
Yeah. And it's a bit like, I think breakdancing was something that, or breaking as I should say. Sorry to all the breakers I know out there. And I've said breakdancing because that's a media term. That's continued on.
Yep.
And you now see these world like championships where they're doing the most insane
Man, it's in the Olympics next year.
It's just out of my, and then we think back to maybe even DJing. I'm sure you'd remember turntablism, like the Invisible Scratch Pickles. Who else were there? There was the
Executioners.
The Executioners. I remember the Mixmaster Mike album, Anti-Theft Device. And I've tried all the different four elements. I've done breakdancing or breaking. Sorry, all the breakers out there. I've done breaking. I tried to be a turntablist DJ. Didn't really have the patience. MCing, I still give MCing a go every now and again. Apologies if anyone who was at the party the other night where I got talked into a freestyle rap and it was pretty terrible. But graffiti has stayed something for me where it just keeps giving. And it's like it can take. I've had a lot of experiences with the law. I've had a lot of experiences like getting my house raided at a young age.
From graffiti?
Yeah. So the first time I got my house raided was when I was 17 years old. And that was an interesting experience, but I didn't stop.
Yeah. Did you learn to potentially cover your tracks better and not keep shit at home?
I learnt to not buy 600 cans of paint thinking to sell it and then go out that night, drink loads of pints and get done drawing a smiley face on a bollard.
Right.
That's what I learnt.
Yeah.
And also...
It's a good lesson.
Also, realised that all this stuff about keep your house clean, don't have evidence in your house, I'm pleased that I'd run with it because they didn't really get much evidence on me. And it was almost then another thing that added to my reputation. It was like, oh, he's the first one that's been arrested in his house raid. And it was like, yeah, I don't care. Yeah, I'm going to keep painting forever. Yeah. Again, that egoic sort of part of me was just getting more and more puffed up and being like, yeah, I'm in for this forever. And I think for some people, that first arrest, that first experience can really put them off. But again, I haven't really stopped. And again, I'm at nowhere near the level that I was doing it in the early 2000s and late 90s. But again, what I've really found is there's so much more from the worldwide graffiti culture that can be there, whether it's making magazines, making a podcast, which is what I do. And I think that then has morphed into my passion about physical and mental health and my occupational therapy and tying that all in together with the graffiti writing culture. Because like we've brushed on, there's a lot of graffiti writers out there who've got some serious physical and mental health problems. And it's not often the most understanding and or empathic subculture. Not all the time, but often it's like have a drink, shut up, smoke a joint. And it can feel a little bit better in the short term, but not long term.
Yeah, and I think that happens a lot with these people that might all have their individual struggles. They get together, they form a crew and potentially do things together that make themselves feel better, but they're also, if there's an issue with drugs or whatever, they're kind of enabling each other a bit as well. So there's negatives and positives to that sort of camaraderie.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it can then... Again, it's such a paradox. And the thing is, I've thought about it so much for so long because I've been painting since I was like 15 years old and I'm 40 now. And I'm still very much passionate about it as a culture and changing the narrative about it being this like mindless, like childish thing that people just do because they don't care. It's almost like the powers that be have convinced everyone it's just wild teenagers, normally male, just being completely out of control and just wanting to destroy society.
And that it couldn't be further from the truth because, you know, obviously there's kids out there that chuck tags at bus stops, but I think 90% of the graffiti that happens isn't teenagers even. It's grown adults who this is their... But society doesn't understand that.
No, and you know, I've heard many a story or had many an experience where, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then suddenly the person shouting realizes it's fully grown men in their mid-30s to early 40s going, fuck off.
Yeah.
And then realizing, oh, okay, this is not a bunch of kids doing this. But then the organization that goes into, so if we talk about, say, for example, train painting, which is a fantastic and amazing part of the graffiti culture, but it's very misunderstood because it's seen as something that's done at random. The planning, the effort, the understanding of the system and the times of the trains and when to get in and when to get out and how to get into places is beyond most people's understanding. And there's some people that you will never really hear of. You'll never see a piece on a roadside or a trackside, but they have been smashing trains across the world in places where you really don't want to get arrested. I mean, I don't want to get arrested anywhere, but going to places like China, to the Philippines, to Russia, and painting metro systems, so underground metro systems, and no one will ever see it run. All that it'll be is hopefully they'll get a photo, and you just think, well, that is absolute madness, but that's why it's so fantastic.
Yeah. I find it really... It's kind of strange now because people started painting trains because they wanted to get their pieces seen.
Yep.
That was what... But then the trains become this mythical thing. You've got to paint the trains. It becomes this trophy. You've got to paint the trains. But the irony is now... less people are going to see them. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
That's the thing. So it started out, let's get seen more, but if you paint a train, half the time they won't run anymore.
Yeah. I mean, since I've lived in Melbourne, I've seen maybe one panel. So a panel is underneath the windows. That's what a panel is referred to as. I've seen one since I've lived in Melbourne, and I get the train a lot, and I often just ride the train specifically just to see what's going on the track sides. But if you can imagine, or if someone can imagine, back in New York City in the 70s and the 80s, it's because it was a rolling canvas. That was the whole point. If you painted on it, it would go into different boroughs of New York City, and more people would see it. But because it's so entwined into graffiti writing culture, books like Subway Art made it, for most people across the world, they're like, oh, I've got to do trains. It's all about the trains. And the idea that someone's never done a train or never painted a train. I remember when I was in my train painting era, or whatever you want to call it, I just think, well, someone's not painted a train? What's the fucking point? What's a waste of time? There's so many people who do such amazing graffiti and get up. But again, it turned into this very hardcore kind of thinking mentality. It's a bit like when I used to smoke a lot of bongs. I used to think that if someone smoked a joint, I was like, pussy, just smoking a joint. Now I can't, if I take one toke on a joint, I'm in a completely different dimension. So yeah.
But that's not even just, that's maturity though, you know, like, and I think, you know, like you said, you're in your 40s, you can't buy maturity, man. Like that takes time to fucking figure that shit out for yourself from life experiences and just growing up.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that it can then become such a... Well, like we're talking about with people that get together and do drugs together or engage in a specific hobby together. People that go out and do cycling. You know, the cyclists, you've seen these massive lines of cyclists who are in Lycra and they're all caning it. You then start to get into this thing where it's like, it's trains only. And then you hang out with people that only paint trains. And it becomes this like, well, there's nothing else that matters but doing trains. But then the risk of actually having your house raided and getting investigated, I don't think many people know how, if you're doing, and I'm not telling anyone what to do, I'm not the metaphorical graffiti police, do whatever the fuck you want, but if you're going to paint trains, do not make it obvious who you are, because you will get your house raided and you can and or will go to jail. Not like friendly jail, you will go to normal jail for painting trains. And that's one of the main things that people bowl into it, go wild, paint too much, or don't cover up their hands, or have tattoos on show, or don't wear a mask when they're actually painting. And then your house, you're going to get a knock at the door, and they're not going to be like, oh, well, it's just some creativity. You could go to fucking jail or have huge fines and just, so.
So what you're saying is if you do it, cover your tracks. Be smart about it.
Yeah. Treat it like a military operation. And I'm not suggesting someone goes out and paints trains, because again, train lines are so dangerous. Being near trains is very, very dangerous. Many, many people, including some people I know, have died from being hit by trains or electrocuted or falling from buildings doing graffiti. And again, that's not just about trains, but be really careful, but also realize there's so many consequences to doing it. But without then encouraging people, there is nothing more in my mind or in my kind of soul that equals a train with a piece on it, or a whole car, so like the whole carriage, or top to bottom, so from the bottom of the carriage to the top. It's like seeing every train that I see that goes past. Even today, I had it behind me when I was just coming back from the gym, and there was a train running, and it's almost like fixated because I'm just looking for this one panel.
That isn't there,
but it's like, and maybe I see an advert on the train, I'm like, shit, there's a panel. Oh no, it's nothing, it's just an advert now.
Do you think that if you painted a lot, you did track sides, you painted walls, but not painted trains, that you could go under the radar? Like, is that what puts you on the radar when it's destruction like that?
I personally think yes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can have a very active career of, I mean, streets, again, one of these things where but if you do track sides, if you do freight trains, again, freight trains are a fantastic middle, because especially in Australia and different parts of the world, there's the United States freight scene. Freights travel all over the different countries. So in the US, you've got it where it goes from Canada through the US and then sometimes down to Mexico, and they can run for years. Here you have it in Australia, where I've seen freight trains that run from Sydney to Adelaide to Melbourne, and they can be 5 or 10 years. Now, that's some longevity.
Yep.
Streets are a bit of a weird one, because depending on what you actually paint can then influence how much heat you get. Because if you're painting like street spots, abandoned buildings, all good, but there's certain writers that want to go and do like really high up spots, or they'll abseil down the building, or do the back of the Westgate Bridge, shout out to the person that did that, really going in, really smashing it. And you can then become on their radar because you're doing these ridiculously public, visible spots, and also just going in, just like absolutely hammering it. But in general, and again, Melbourne is a different kind of city than virtually anywhere else I've lived, because the number of active graffiti writers in Melbourne still boggles my brain. Mm-hmm. But yeah, trains, if you're gonna be going in, don't get done for doing a drunk tag, or just make sure you're just careful. And again, that safety thing for your own sanity.
So we've figured out that a lot of graffiti writers have a common thread of potential trauma and stuff, which pushes them into that. Now you try and help people.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty hard pastime to try and tell people that maybe you need help, or let's talk about other ways that you can better yourself without the destructive side of it. Is that generally well received, or do people seek out their help from you rather than you say, hey, there's other ways that you can, find some peace? You know what I mean?
Good question. So I guess originally I had no aim to make Toy Division like a physical, mental, social, positive thing. Again, I didn't want it to be negative, but gradually over time, and again, I started it during COVID, or the COVID era, or whatever you want to call it, COVID nightmare, whatever. And then over time, I started to like chuck some little bits in about physical and mental health, and people started to reach out to me. And I think we're in a much better world in general when it comes to being able to talk about mental health issues. The suicide rates and loneliness of young men, or just people in general, has skyrocketed in the last few years. And I've never had it where I want to tell people how to live their life, because you can tell people and give people advice until you're blue in the face, but showing people that having an experience or being a drug addict or being an alcoholic or having schizophrenia or paranoid delusions or the things, they're not actually as rare as people realize, and being able to open up the kind of the conversation about it, because there's a lot of people that feel comfortable talking about it, but there's also a lot of people who have just been told, don't be weak, don't admit you're vulnerable, it's weak to talk about your feelings. And then that comes into a lot of like upbringing in a lot of westernized societies, or just societies in general. It's like, be the tough guy, don't admit that you're having a problem. The big downside of that is we then internalize feelings, and then people end up committing suicide because they've had no opportunity to feel like anyone gives a shit. They're lonely and they just see no other way out.
Yeah. A few months back, I had a dude on the show who had spent a stint in prison, and I found it baffling that there's no mental health support in prison.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe there is, but that's a sign of weakness. And people are probably, if you're in prison, you're in the deepest, darkest point of your life, potentially, I'd imagine, and there's no mental health support there, or if there is, people don't want to seek it out because it's a sign of weakness, and that's fucking sad.
Yeah, well, the whole justice system, Australia, UK, US, it's pretty fucked, to be honest. You're essentially using punishment as a way of forcing people to behave, and the irony is you're then chucking a lot of people into jail who maybe have committed minor offences, with a load of other people who have committed even worse offences, and then expecting them to pop out cured. Now, I know plenty of people that have been to jail and come out and be like, I'm never going back there ever again.
So it worked in that respect.
But again, is that actually change? Is that fear-based compliance, which is essentially what if you force someone to do, and then often they're very, very strict. And you've also got prison staff who are like underfunded, undertrained, undersupervised, don't really understand what the basic understanding of what how the brain works, what trauma is, what the stress response is, how that influences someone's behavior, how, someone's sensory processing influences their behavior, which influences their emotions. They don't give a shit about that. They're just going to force people to do stuff. And it can either send people on I'm just going to comply, or fuck the system, fuck the law, fuck the judges, fuck everybody. I'm just going to fucking go at it. And the justice system needs massive, massive reform, because chucking people into jail does not fix crime. I get that if someone's done something very, very terrible, to save whether this is a forensic mental health setting, so forensic if I can just said MILF then, forensic mental health, Freudian slip, forensic mental health setting is a jail or a prison where someone is too mentally unwell to be in the regular jail system. So they then actually get treatment. So it's like being in a mental health hospital where they get therapy, they get...
Which should be the first thing we should be doing, really.
But again, if we think about the old school mentality of you've done something wrong, you need to be punished, that will stop you being bad.
Yeah.
But again, the justice system, because again, the war on drugs, chucking people into jail who have drug problems, the vast majority of people in jail is for non-violent crimes. You're then just creating almost like a petri dish of other people traumatizing each other and becoming violent, seeing more violence, more trauma.
And then trapped in a cycle.
And then also people coming out of jail, and it's like, well, just sort yourself out.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've got a criminal record. I've got a criminal record for like possession of, this isn't me, someone's got a criminal record for possession of 20 grams of cocaine. Trying to go and get a job where you've got to declare that. It's like drug possession. It's a completely fucking messed up system that is not giving people the opportunities. They're like, well, I did it. I did that. That's not been my problem. But everyone needs that safety, that connection, that feeling of like empathy. And people think, well, that's fucking weak. Sort your shit out. Have a drink. Smoke a fucking joint. But that's not how we evolved as humans. We didn't evolve in these like tiny little pockets. We're tribes. Yeah, we fought other humans and big cats and mammoths and all that kind of stuff. But this is what I really want to achieve with Toy Division, is opening up the conversation and creating like a positive community of other people that support each other.
So okay, let's say it's time for an overhaul. They go, Mr. TD, you're in charge, right? It's total time for an overhaul. The justice system, everything. How would you redraw it? How would you reinvent the whole fucking system? I know that's a lot to ask, but let's talk about it.
I've thought about this.
Okay.
I guess without having to then, because there's so many moving parts to the justice system, the police system, just the system. You know, people go, fuck the system. There's so many parts of that system, so many moving parts. I guess the main thing would be is just to, from the get-go, is to educate the people that are actually the staff in the justice system to understand the very basics of neurobiology and developmental trauma. For them to understand, not to get into PhD level, but to understand about how life experiences, how the brain works, and that's not then like PhD level, but a simple brain model of like, when you get really upset, your prefrontal cortex basically goes offline, and then something inside called the amygdala, which is the stress response, comes into play, and you're not thinking straight. Now, that's Dan Siegel's hand-brain model, but just to understand how to deal with situations where someone becomes aggressive. Police are not equipped, prison staff are not equipped or trained to understand that if you turn up and get really aggressive with someone, that is likely to make them even more distressed and get even more violent in most situations. Yep. Just understanding the basics. So it's not changing the system, but it's making people understand, oh, okay, so the way that I talk to someone, my tone of voice, my facial expression, if I'm standing next to them with a baton like this going, calm down, lay down, all this type of stuff, that's not going to de-escalate a situation. And I think that's like a foundational thing. And at least we could then start moving from there. But otherwise, you've then got it where you're trying to change a system that at the core, at the foundation of the whole pyramid, is just completely dysregulated and completely overwhelmed. But trying to then tell a cop that who's like, no, I just bash him and chuck him in a cell, that sorts it out.
But it really needs to start as, okay, let's talk about why this person is doing this, what society deems as wrong, and let's figure out what is triggering that, and let's change that before we get to the punishment stage. So I think that needs to start at school, you know what I mean? Like there needs to be more each school should have, I don't know if they do because I haven't been to school for it, but needs like therapists. People should be going to talk. I think every kid once a week should be like, okay, let's go and talk to the school and let's what's going, because you need to stop these things before it gets to that. Once you get to adult like detention, the problems are already manifested to that point, you know.
And I think the other thing that comes into play with all that is that it doesn't have to be that the young person needs to just be shown what they're doing is wrong. I'm not saying you're saying that, but introducing things like mindfulness, meditation, how what you do or don't eat influences how you feel, how your sleep, how staying up till 4 a.m. looking at TikTok probably isn't good for your mind. How you deal with stress, like some basic breath work. God, it would have been so useful when I was younger and again, a lot of the teachers would like these old, rusty, shout at people, kick them out, that old school mentality. Hopefully people are starting to realize there's a different way of doing things, but just giving young people an understanding, if you can control and influence how your nervous system, so your spinal cord, your brain, and all the connections to your different parts of your nervous system, you can be influencing that just by the way that you breathe. If you do long out breaths, that kicks in your parasympathetic nervous system, which is like rest, digest, and feed. And that's how you need to be calm. But it doesn't have to be like, little Mr. TD or Master TD or whatever my name would be if I was a metaphorical child. He can't regulate himself, so we need to give him a diagnosis of ADHD and oppositional defiance disorder, give him some medication and it'll be solved. And that's the other thing that I really believe in, is that lifestyle is one of the main levers we've got to influence our physical and mental health. And that's resonated really, really well through Toy Division. But just understanding that. So if little Master TD has had a terrible night's sleep, he's eaten, I don't know, Fruit Loops. I don't even know they sell them in Australia. I was just listening to a podcast about it. For breakfast and loads of
sugary shit,
has had a terrible night's sleep, and his mum's just shouted at him for taking too long. Well, why can't he sit down and concentrate at school? Because his brain and body and mind is just all over the place. And a lot of schools, they often take away play by saying that it's useless. It's a waste of time. It's like play is how we really learn. It's how we learn about social interactions. It's how we learn about the world, because we need movement. We need everything. And it's like, oh, playtime is useless.
Yeah. It's cool that kids have PE, but I think after you get to a certain age, you don't have to do that anymore. And I think that is extremely sad, because everyone needs to do some sort of physical exercise most of the time.
100%.
You know?
100%. And this is the thing I think gets lost in the equation. It's like movement. We are built to move. We spent hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years evolving, moving, hunting, gathering, doing things where it involved thinking and moving at the same time. And all that type of stuff has kind of just been like pushed away. It's like, oh no, you don't need to do that. Just go to the gym for half an hour twice a week. That's fine. But we've got a whole generation of people at both ends of this spectrum where obesity rates, diabetes rates for children is going bananas. And we've got a whole tsunami coming of what's called cognitive decline or cognitive disorders such as dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, because we're living really unhealthy lifestyles. We're not really moving. We're really sedentary. And we're often just being told, here you go, take Ozempic. This will help you to lose weight. Oh, no, it'll turn your stomach into cement and you'll lose all your muscle. But it's like, well, just take this medication. That will solve it. Let's pathologize everything and just give you a medication and piss off.
So where do you stand on the medicating stuff? So obviously now we live in a time where everybody gets diagnosed. Like when we were younger, I'm about your age, you know, there was an ADHD kid or whatever, but we didn't really understand there wasn't all these different levels of diagnosis.
Yeah.
So now there is. Do you believe that people need to be medicated, or that should be the last sort of attempt at trying to sort of tackle these issues?
I personally think it should be the last part of like a sequence where it's sleep and nutrition. Number one should be sleep and nutrition. If your sleep is poor, if you're staying up till 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, if you're getting blue light into your eyes from artificial lights, if your sleep's messed up, you're not getting good quality sleep consistently, if you're sleep deprived, nothing will help. Nothing will help, because that is the foundation of detoxifying our brain, going through this virtual reality state, which is REM sleep, which is getting all the stuff in our day and processing it all. And that's the foundation. Nutrition, food is medicine. The foundation of every single cell in your entire body is made up from what you do or don't eat. I spent my whole childhood eating terrible food. And then you've got, you know, behavioral tools, so things like exercise, stress, reducing your stress, so breath work, yoga, tai chi. It doesn't have to be just that, but just spending time journaling, all these things which are quite simple things to do. And then medication should really be, and then supplementation, you know, so the sequence would probably be sleep and nutrition, and then behavioral tools, then supplementation, because people think, I've eaten really terrible food all week. I've drunk like 20 pints in the last couple of days. I'm just going to take a Berocca. That'll sort it out. Nah, that's probably going to help a little bit. But the supplementation part, there's many parts of that. And then medication should really be the last tool. The problem is we live in what's called the allopathic medical model world, which doesn't really look at the whole person. And people think, holistic, it sounds like people in like yoga pants or people that are just talking about chakras and stuff. Well, that's a whole other subject. But the foundation of our physical and mental health is the elements of our, not the 4 elements, not breaking, DJing and MCing, but like what we do or don't eat, physical movement, sleep, and stress regulation or stress management, but also belonging in community. So to actually answer your question, one of the massive things is we've got an issue called diagnosis creeping. So what happens over time is the pharmaceutical industry are insanely powerful when it comes to what a diagnosis is. So over time, you know, you might have this criteria. So ADHD is one of the big issues for me at the moment, because it seems like every single person who goes in and says, I've had depression, I've had overwhelm, I can't concentrate, is then being told, well, you've got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I'm not disputing those diagnoses, but if someone's not dealing with those things I was talking about earlier, nutrition and sleep, if you're not focusing on those and sorting those out first, being told it's just a dopamine deficiency is looking at it in such a myopic way of looking at it. And the problem is there is evidence that amphetamine medication, all types of medications, there might be a pro or there might be a con. Do they outweigh each other? The downside is there's a lot of suggestion and or evidence coming out in the literature that higher risk of Parkinson's disease due to long-term amphetamine use. There's higher risk of experiencing psychosis. And they can be very addictive. And the thing is with that is that if we pathologize every human experience, every human emotion, without looking at the foundations of health that I was talking about, you can then just have it where you just get what's called polypharmacy. It's like, oh, you've got ADHD, so here's some stimulant meds, but then you're not sleeping very well, so have some benzodiazepines such as Valium, Xanax, to then get you down to be able to sleep. But then you're having the withdrawals and addiction associated with that. So here's some then antipsychotics, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Which all plays into the pharmaceutical companies because they've got, well, now you've had this, so you've got to have this to counteract that side effect, and then they just keep growing and
that's
growing.
What I was talking about, the diagnosis creeping. Like the criteria of conditions like ADHD, like bipolar disorder, like anxiety disorder, whatever, they get bigger and bigger and bigger every year, or every time that the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM-5, I think I've said the statistical bit right, it's like, it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's like, oh, now you have this, or you have this. I'll give you ADHD. I'll give you ADHD. And I think my friend and I, we have these very heated conversations about it because I got diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years ago, and that was after a long period of time. But I stopped taking my medication about 3 weeks ago, and I've been taking it solidly for a couple of years. And one of the reasons why I stopped taking it was because there's a worldwide shortage of ADHD medications. Now, that would suggest to me way too many people are taking stimulant medications.
Yeah.
And if we're thinking about what could be the downstream effects of that, if all that people are doing is being given a tablet to take and it's a stimulant medication, if it works for people, power to them. I don't want anyone to sit there and be like, well, medication's bad or sleep is bad or whatever. But I just think there's so much more to the conversation because just taking a tablet to cover up a symptom is not finding that root cause medicine, which really is the future, which is otherwise known as functional medicine. And it just very much concerns me that people are just still living a really unhealthy life where they're higher likelihood of cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these conditions, which you're then not really addressing by just going, I'll just take a stimulant med. So that was a bit of a rant, but...
No. It totally makes sense. But I think the hard thing is if you go to the GP and they say, look, and obviously they're seeing way too many clients anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But you go to the GP and you say, look, I've got this condition. They say, yeah, you do. You've got that. Have you worked on your eating? Have you worked on your sleeping? Mm-hmm. That's hard for them to actually monitor that patient doing that. So they just say the easy way out is take the pill, you're sorted, you know?
I personally think that, again, we're talking about changing the justice system. That's why the medical system, it's basically a sick care system at the moment. Yeah. It's like, oh, you have these symptoms, here's a medication to deal with it. That's not really holistic health. That is a huge flaw. It was to try and stop disease, so dis-ease, acute diseases where most people died, infections, tuberculosis, if I can pronounce it, leprosy, all these horrendous, like whooping cough, I say whoop, were the things that kill people. What kills most people now is chronic health conditions. Diabetes is so bad. People don't realise you go blind. People
lose their legs and stuff.
I used to work in an amputation ward with people having their legs removed, and these weren't morbidly obese people. A lot of them were so skinny. They had no muscle. They were having legs removed.
And that's dietary, though. But it's also some of it's hereditary.
Again, genetics is one of those things where most health conditions are not a genetic component, but there's so much that can be done. But again, it's like this narrative of here's the medication. And again, I've got a huge problem with the dietitians of the world as well, because they're going often off a model which is hugely influenced by the food industry.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that like breakfast was contrived by just companies that were trying to sell cereal and shit. Like that whole,
Yeah,
obviously it existed,
Kellogg's,
but
Kellogg's, yeah.
Kellogg's started that sort of stuff. So everyone's influenced by, big business has too much say in how we live our lives, though. That's the problem.
And it's kind of, without meaning to sound like a pun, it's feeding into itself, because it's like, and I don't think it's this giant conspiracy. It was like, get everyone fat and really ill and everyone's dying. It's basically profit. It's like, if you make things profitable, there is some good movements, though, in the world where people are like, hang on a second, the actual cost to the healthcare system is huge. One thing I'm trying to do with Toy Division is create this movement of people that can get together and not be just told, here's an information sheet, here's the food pyramid. Oh God, the food pyramid, the worst. It just needs to be turned upside down. Eat like 5 million pieces of bread a day. And then turning it into like a community and turning it into something where we get together and we support each other, because being part of a group where you're doing something together, maybe it's someone wants to lose weight, maybe someone wants to use a ketogenic style eating pattern to go into remission for their schizophrenia, which is an amazing field of research. But I think often we've got gatekeepers. You know, the GPs are so overworked, underpaid. Often they went to medical school 20 years ago. And I'm not saying I'm not a medical doctor, but often I've gone to see a GP for the only reasons I need a referral on for something else. And I've just been like, this person has no fucking clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, and then you're in and out and they've got someone else in 10 minutes' time anyway. The thing is with the medical system, and look, now where we are down here, there's not one bulk billing place anymore.
Yeah.
There's none, which is, okay, I can afford to do it. But a lot of people, they don't have those resources. They don't have the money to pay for that, which is only going to make this whole system worse, because the people that need it the most are the people that can't afford it.
Yeah. And I think the most powerful thing can be is the lifestyle part. The biggest lever you've possibly got is virtually all chronic health conditions can be at least improved, if not put into remission, which in the medical training 15, 20 years ago, like, what do you mean remission? So going to remission for schizophrenia, going into full remission for Parkinson's. And that's not saying it's a cure, but a holistic view of health is how it's the only way that we're going to actually have hope. Because if we continue down this path we're going down, the whole medical system across the world is just going to implode into itself, because there's hundreds of thousands, if not trillions of dollars just going into just helping people with symptoms. And people are going fucking blind. There's childhood obesity. It suggests that 93% of the US population is approaching diabetes or diabetic. And that is so detrimental to all of our physical and mental. And that's not just physically. All the link between, so Alzheimer's is being seen as diabetes type 3. And it's like, I don't want to get Alzheimer's. I don't want to get dementia. But there's a lot of people that are now looking at this whole situation and going, this cannot be right. And there's people at Harvard Medical School, Stanford, Chris Palmer. That's whose kind of model of brain energy I'm going with at the moment. And there is hope. But it's just trying to change the old school. My nan and granddad like, doctor knows best, go to doctor, he knows best.
Yeah, but now we face a whole different diagnosis thing with people self-diagnosing and Dr. Google and people looking it up, and I've definitely got this.
Yeah.
You see it on social media. People are just self-diagnosing themselves with fucking whatever, with no, like, they're not going to a specialist. They just looked up something on fucking Wikipedia and they've decided they've got it.
Yeah, and that's one of my things I've got as well, is that people don't really get what a condition or a diagnosis actually is. It's a collection of symptoms that have been lumped together to try and make sense of the complexity of the human organism. And people don't quite get that. Oh, I've seen something on TV about ADHD. I can't concentrate and I don't like my job and I don't like being in busy social situations. That's a symptom of ADHD. Therefore, I've got ADHD. Therefore, everything in my life can be explained by ADHD. When they're eating shit food, they're not sleeping, they're staying up to like 3 or 4 in the morning.
Self-medicating, taking drugs or whatever, you know.
Drinking alcohol there's nothing healthy about drinking alcohol at all. Like smoking weed. I'm not going to get into that whole conversation, but it's not good for you. These things are not good for you. Now, I'm not telling someone how to live their life. I'm a recovered hardcore drug addict and alcoholic. and I still drink a little bit, but I'm very aware that they are not beneficial to my life. But those foundations of health, so sleep, what you do or don't eat or drink, stress management, and movement and or exercise, those are the things to really focus on at first. And that's the tough way of doing it, but it will bring exponential benefits to your physical and mental health at any age. And there's always hope.
Yeah. I think one thing that we don't do enough in this country, and I'm not complaining because our medical health system is pretty good from a global scale,
Yep.
but we don't afford people the opportunity to talk to therapists or counsellors enough. So from my personal standpoint, I've gone through some times where I've like done the mental health check at the GP. You get 10 visits or whatever but after that, you might be paying $200 a visit, and that's expensive. And these are the things that the people that really need that help. Like if someone goes to the doctor and says, "I need to talk to someone. I'm having a really bad run," and they say, "Yeah, but you can have this amount of visits and then you're cut off." That's not right. That's got to be changed big time.
And I think, what we were talking about with schools, like starting from childhood.
Sure.
It's like talking to someone, fantastic. But again, like we said, if you're not sleeping very well, you're staying up to 3 or 4 in the morning watching, I don't know, God knows.
Playing Fortnite. That's what all the kids do.
Yeah. You're fucked. Like if you're not, it's like you can talk to someone in the world. And this term I really like or this phrase is, there's no biology without psychology and there's no psychology without biology. So our body and our brain is influenced by our mind, and our mind is separate from our brain. But if we're eating crappy food and we're not sleeping and we're sitting on the sofa all day and we're drinking like 10 pints a day, you can talk to someone till the end of time, but your physical and mental health is awful. And it doesn't have to be separate. It doesn't have to be, oh, you do this, you just go and run for 12 years. Well, it's about having where we've got a change of society, because we've got the biological, the psychological, and the social model of the world, so the biopsychosocial. And one of the big issues we've got is society in general. Some places it's really hard to find healthy food, or it's seen as, oh, well, that there's certain areas to go and find an organic cafe. So really good quality food, not use pesticides, fungicides, rodenticides, which are all poisons. You've got to go to some really rich areas.
Yeah.
And like, if you go to like the rundown parts of whatever city, you ain't going to find an organic thing. So that's something I want to do is, as Toy Division continues to grow, I want to create a space where people not necessarily from the rich parts of, say, Melbourne or Sydney can go somewhere, learn, but also socialize and eat well and learn about what real physical and mental health actually is, rather than being told, here's a medication. If it doesn't work, tough shit, sessions are gone, it's your fault.
Yeah, and I think to throw someone out on their ass when they most need that help, when their sessions have run out, is probably the most detrimental thing you could do. Like, you've sort of undone that hard work. From your personal, I just want to try and understand, as someone who doesn't have ADHD, you said you don't take your medication. And I know that some people that I know that have had that diagnosed don't take the medication because it says that makes them not feel like themselves. Is that sort of where you're coming from? Or you just think that there's other ways to attack it?
I was taking it, and again, I'm always trying to consider the holistic parts or the more broad perspective. I just don't want to be a slave to the pharmaceutical industry, because they are so dishonest, and the amount of diagnosis creeping that's influenced by the pharmaceutical industry. And also, I see every single day in my job people that are on a ridiculously long list of medications. It does not fix things.
Yep.
It's literally like a band-aid over a giant samurai sword wound. It's like, it's not changing things. And for me, it was like, you know what? I'm really going to go hardcore ketogenic again. Really get those mitochondria inside all my cells working. There's also a really good, I think it's the Bazooki Foundation, doing a Metabolic Mind YouTube channel. And that's all about people with like schizophrenia, bipolar, chronic depression, eating a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, which is great because you lose weight as well, which is fantastic. I don't want to say I'm vain. But also that, rather than having this fucking bullshit cycle of like, got to go to a GP, get my referral to the psychiatrist, pay $350 to the psychiatrist, he'll just give me medication again. And basically with ADHD treatment at the moment, it's like, it's not a short-term intervention. It's like, you're going to have to take stimulants for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm instantly like, nah.
Where do you sit on, and this is just pivoting out a little bit, where do you sit on the legalization of like recreational drugs? Like obviously now people are getting a lot more medical marijuana, but do you think that is helping problems? Do you think that's another Band-Aid solution? Where do you sit on that sort of thing? Because we are trending in that direction and people are talking more about decriminalisation and legalisation of drugs.
Yeah. I think for the decriminalisation part is because, again, the war on drugs has been an absolute unbelievable failure and created such an incredibly traumatic, like a world trauma across the globe, and has been used to imprison and just push people out of society that really have needed help for a long time. Like, it's a health condition. It shouldn't be a justice system issue. The reason why most people die from drugs is because they are getting drugs with God fucking knows what's in it. You know, the fentanyl issue we've got at the moment is...
It's horrible, isn't it? Yeah.
A friend of mine, a cousin, was in recovery, had been completely clean for 2 or 3 years. At a party, someone had some powder cocaine. This is in Canada. Just goes, do you want a line? She went, all right. Well, she did like quite a hefty bump. Boom, died of a fentanyl overdose. Now, this idea that drugs are bad and deadly and people that do drugs are terrible people and all this type of stuff, that's old school. That's that old school mentality coming from, you know, the stereotypical thing is in, Train Spotting. Where he's like, I don't know, you can do that shit. You put that shit in your body. As his dad's like smoking tons of ciggies and drinking whiskey. And again, heroin's probably a bit worse than whiskey and cigarettes. But the decriminalisation is just the start, because drugs and alcohol is a drug, can really, really fuck up your life really fucking badly. And it has been for so many people for so long. And then what we've done is often just chuck people into jail. And things like, oh, these drug gangs and the gangs that are doing this. At least if you can get the drugs and have them, you know, not legalized, because I think people get really panicked, don't they? They go, oh, it's going to be legalized, so you'll just be able to buy really good cocaine from your corner store. Maybe that could be useful at times. But the way in which we're trying to turn away from just punishing people,
Yeah.
you know, chucking people in jail. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was a guy from Sydney or Melbourne saying back in the 70s, you'd get a month in jail for like a joint in your pocket.
Yeah.
And how
now it's legal almost.
And how has that changed? You know, this whole thing is, my dad's ex-police, which was a very interesting dynamic to grow up with, but you know, he was very much in this thing of, I'm saving the community, I'm stopping the drugs. Where at this whole time he'd be telling me those stories, I was smoking weed every day,
Yeah.
taking pingers all the time and sniffing coke. And it's like, what are we really stopping? Like, and all the money that goes into it, I think it's just such a massive issue. And I actually think it's going to take a generation of people, as in older people, to kind of like pass away before real change can happen.
Yeah. And you think that it should be like decriminalisation? Sure, we're not throwing people in jail, but do you think that more recreational drugs should be legalised to the point that you could get a prescription if you wanted to try that sort of shit?
It's a tough one, because I've really fucked up my brain from doing drugs in my life. But I think it's a complex one, because, you know, people are abusing drugs anyway, but they're abusing drugs in secrecy. They're abusing drugs behind closed doors and often not getting the help that they need. Like, if you're really addicted to, say, methamphetamine here in Australia, you don't go and tell all your mates. Like, people keep it so hidden, and there's still so much, oh, you fucking junkie, you can't fucking control yourself, you all this stuff. It just needs a whole shift, like we've talked about today already. Yeah. We need a complete review of the justice system. We need a complete review of the school system. We need a complete review of the drug and alcohol.
And I agree, and that's great. But we still have to deal with what we've currently got. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
in a perfect world, we could overhaul the political system, the justice, everything. But we need to. We've got to deal with. The cards with dealt.
It's a very, very slow change with everything, and I'm not thinking it's like, abolish the police, you know, in the US, they're how like, defund the police.
Which makes no sense.
Abolish the police, and then like burnt down places. Like, well, that's fucking dumb.
Yeah.
But I guess it's changing, and over time, things are changing. So I'll give an example of how that's got nothing to do with drug and alcohol reform or whatever. But at the weekend, I was in Sydney. I went to a painting jam in a drain somewhere. And I think in total, about 50 graffiti writers went and painted. Now, shout out to the person that organised that. What a legend. I didn't see anyone get stabbed. I didn't see anyone get a beating. So that was really positive. But he was talking about how that drain spot, you could only normally used to be able to do it on a Sunday because people would come out of the factories because it's like factories backs onto the drain. And they'd come out and go, you fucking assholes, start throwing stuff at people. Get the fuck away from here. What are you doing? Now the people in the factories come out and go, oh, that's amazing. Take photos. Oh, do you reckon you could try and paint this? We love seeing this stuff. Now that just shows you generationally. Yeah, generationally, if I can pronounce it. Things change. So like they're people that are now probably working in those factories that probably grew up and knew a couple of graffiti writers at school. That it's not like, oh, this is the worst thing in the world. So gradually over time, things can change. I just think there's a lot of people out there who need help when it comes to understanding their physical and mental health and like their life experiences. And for me, it was like I found smoking weed when I was like 15, 16, and I hardcore abused it, but I kept it so secret.
Yeah.
Okay, I had my mates who I went and smoked bongs with and whatever, but like I couldn't talk to my parents about it.
Yeah. But so on your personal journey, obviously you're wise to what is causing these issues and how to better yourself. But how did that happen? Did you hit rock bottom before you started to figure that stuff out?
So I've died twice. First time was from a really bad head injury when I was very heavily intoxicated. And again, this is after years of like being admitted to hospital, as in like medical hospital, overdoing drugs, falling off bridges, being hit by cars, being hit by a bus, being really heavily intoxicated, getting lots of beatings. And then it came to a really bad point where I woke up in a brain injury ward, like a specialist brain injury ward, and I had a double skull fracture and a brain hemorrhage. So I didn't know who I was, where I was. I was experiencing kind of the symptoms of kind of like dementia, Alzheimer's. So I was trying to break out.
How old are you just at this point?
This was 2011, that was. So 12 years ago, 28, 29? Yeah. So that was obviously really bad, thankfully, because I had a young brain and because I'd been eating relatively healthy and doing exercise. I had a bit of what's known as neuroplasticity, so my brain had the ability to kind of rewire. Again, what people laugh at is the bit that was really damaged was my speech and language part of my brain, so I couldn't really talk. They thought I was going to be like disabled for the rest of my life. So that was obviously challenging. And then I accidentally overdosed on fentanyl in, how many years later was that? It was like 3 or 4 years later. Again, another drug, which I thought was something, bought it off the internet. This is cocaine. Turned out to be laced with fentanyl and literally died and was found in my bedroom, completely blue, not breathing. Paramedics, thankfully my mate knew CPR, and then kind of woke up on the stretcher being taken to the hospital. So those were things where I'd wanted to kind of change. And I think this is the thing that people don't get is when someone has a really bad drug and alcohol problem, there's this idea they just don't give a shit and they don't want to change and they're just being selfish and it's a choice. Now, I'm not saying that if someone doesn't want to change, then it's like, oh, well, it's not their fault. And there needs to be some kind of wanting to change and seeing that it's affecting other people, hitting rock bottom, all that type of term. But I quickly realized I was like, I can't go on like this. Like I've nearly died twice. And the realization where it's that real small incremental changes to change my life and change like my, I could have been dead by 30.
Yeah.
And that would have been really like a waste. And so many people are on that trajectory and they could just die. And again, people die for many, many different reasons. But I think I can then bring to the conversation, not only with my therapy clients, I don't tell them in the first session, oh, well, I nearly died from a fentanyl overdose and a brain injury, but at least gives me a viewpoint where I can see that when someone's in a really hardcore addiction or really struggling physical or mental health wise, it's really hard and it's really fucking horrible experience to go through. And then you can kind of bring that to people and telling a story like this, people are like, oh my God, I'm not the only one who's really fucked up. I'm not the only one who's really struggling with whatever addiction or whatever's going on. And I think that's a really important part of the story.
And it must be helpful for people to see that you've come from a similar sort of spot as them and they can get out of it. I find it really interesting how a lot of people who go through these issues end up wanting to help people, and that cycle continues, which is fucking awesome. And it seems like you were one of those people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I always try and say to people is there's hope. Like, you can be in the most shitty situation. You can have just come out of jail, be morbidly obese, background of absolute trauma, horrible life experiences, and it's never going to be like, well, just sort it out. But there's always hope, and there also is people out there who do give a shit and do want to help, but also, without then sounding judgmental, that spark, that original thing, like, I want to change, needs to come from inside.
Yep.
You can be told you need to change by 1,000,001 different people, but it needs to come from that spark of like, okay, I do want to change. But then once you've had that spark, it's like the environment then provides you with the tools that you need.
It's the old, I believe, like, you can't help someone who won't help themselves. You can definitely help somebody, but they have to want to make the change. And once they do, then you can,
Otherwise, you're just forcing them to do it.
Yeah, and that's not coming from the right spot.
Fear-based compliance is like, oh, if you don't fucking stop sniffing coke, I'm going to divorce you. Yeah. Or whatever. Or if you don't stop doing heroin, we're going to put you in jail. Well, weirdly enough, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Now, again, it's this whole thing of like, is it personal responsibility or is it the environment? But it's that biological, psychological and social model that fits all in together. So if you come out of jail or you've got a heroin problem or whatever, and you come out and you've got no job opportunities, you live in a shit area, you live in a house that is surrounded by other people that maybe smoke meth or do heroin, and you've got no opportunities, you've got nothing going on, weirdly enough, you might slip into doing the drugs again, and then it's just like a vicious cycle.
I've spent most of my life in St Kilda, and look, that's what happens. These people get out of jail. They don't really know where to go. They say, look, if you go to this place, there's boarding houses, there's halfway houses. I live near heaps of them. They go there because they don't know where else they go. Who are you associating with? You're associating with other ex-criminals, drug addicts, and the cycle fucking continues.
Yeah. And that's, as a human species, we want to feel safe, connected, that we belong to a social group. And whether that's health promoting or really not health promoting at all, we will gravitate towards other humans to feel safe, because otherwise social isolation, and it's being seen now that being socially isolated is the equivalent of smoking about 15 to 20 cigarettes a day on your long-term health.
Yeah. With a lot of these people with hardcore drug addiction, I think that a lot of that, it's like... what's the word? So their parents have had similar issues, and then I'm not saying that it's within, like it's trying to fucking my words. I'm not saying it's hereditary, but it's definitely cyclical. With it, like if you've grown up in a house with a hardcore drug addiction, there's a good chance that you're going to fall down that same sort of path. Yeah,
and I guess that's that whole thing of like, and I know some people that have come from good families, because what does a good family mean? It's like, oh, we've got money. That doesn't mean shit. So a lot of the people I've worked with over the years, some of the most fucked up people I either know or have known or have worked with as a therapist, come from a lot of money.
Which then affords them the ability sometimes to leave the kids to their own devices. They've got money around, and that drugs...
And also, where does that person get a feeling of safety and connection? If the only thing that they can do is achieve academically, business, property-wise, they don't get any feelings of like safety and connection with their parents. It's like, well, we gave you everything and you haven't done this. You know, it's one of these scenarios where the cards that we're dealt, or the hand that we're dealt, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be our future, or it's a fixed outcome. It's like, is it nature or nurture? Well, it's a combination of both in a very complex myriad of things that tie in all together. But what I hope that we can communicate to people is that you don't have to go down that path.
Yeah.
Like, if you can start getting some movement, if you can start looking at your sleep, if you can start thinking about, I actually do deserve to live a life. I do deserve to live a life where people give a fuck about me.
Yeah.
I do deserve to have safety and connection and positive experiences. That can really, really help people like drag themselves out of the depths of hell. Like people, I know some people that have had the worst fucking upbringings, been in the foster care system and turned themselves into like amazing, empathic, productive, and actually quite well-off, affluent people.
Yeah.
But the great thing about most of those people is they know where they've come from, And that is something which I hope can inspire anybody, because you don't have to just be like, well, fuck it, everything's fucked. I've been given this shit deck of cards, so what's the point? I might as well just not bother. And I think that Toy Division brings that, hopefully, to some people where they're like, actually, I can just make these small changes and actually my life can be better, because it's not like your destiny is like, it's not a predefined, it's not like, oh, well, you're going to be born and this is bad and your family's shit, because there's so many things where people can start off as super affluent. And again, money isn't everything, because we know there's many people who are very rich and really fucking miserable and really sick.
Yeah.
But having it where you feel like there's hope and connection and associating with people who aren't dickheads, because that's the number one thing I would say to people is don't just hang around with people because of their status, because if they're dickheads, it's not good for your brain, not good for your mind.
You inevitably are who you hang out with, I think. Yeah. And that is like, you are a product of your environment. If your environment's shit, you can't hang around in that environment and expect that you're going to change. You have to cognitively make those changes and get out of that shit scenario, you know?
As much as possible. If you're morbidly obese and you hang around with other people who are morbidly obese and eat shit food, not through any blame or finger pointing, it's very, very likely you're going to stay morbidly obese. If you're a hardcore meth addict and you try and go clean and then you hang around with loads of people smoking out of a glass pipe, it's going to be really fucking hard to change.
Yeah.
And
you've got to make those decisions and get out of those situations.
And just try as much as possible and try and find people that are like on a positive, and I know positivity, it's really loose and like, but it's like positive growth mindsets. Like, let's do some positive things, not just for yourself, but like for other people, the world. Be kind to people, because people have been very much brainwashed into the idea it's all about the self, the individual, about crushing it, beast mode. Yeah, but that's just burning yourself out. And then you'll get to a point where you're like, if all you care about is how many hours you've worked in a week or how big your house is, I'll be honest, you'll be fucking miserable, because that's a never-ending hamster wheel.
Yeah. We're also faced with some different challenges now. Like, the internet is awesome. I often talk about the pros and cons of the internet.
Oh, yeah.
We're now never more connected, but at the same time, you can be connected technically online, but you're disconnected, and the loneliness happens big time. People don't, they're talking to somebody online, but you're sitting there in your fucking room, pretty fucking lonely.
We've never had in human history as much connection, literally, as we do have now. We are in the most when I was a kid in the 80s and early 90s there'll be this worldwide network of computers. You can like video call. That's like something out of a fucking sci-fi movie. That's like something out of like a Star Trek episode. And you're like, what, you can like video call people and chat and like write people messages and it all comes through. But we're the most lonely, isolated, and probably like really mentally unwell. And again, there's many reasons why that's happening. It's not just because of the internet, but we're supposedly the most connected we've ever been in human history, and we are so isolated.
But what's the answer to that, though? Like, what do we need to do? Just make more physical connections, make more, like, just make an effort to get out and socialise more with people?
Yeah. That and that's, things like the barbecues that I've been running in the west of Melbourne, getting people out and socialising. It doesn't have to be, you just know internet, because the internet, what a tool we have. Like, I remember just trying to work out what's on at the cinema. You'd have to like ring the cinema. Yeah. Wait, at 1 p.m. there is Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark at 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3. You'd be like, I don't care. Well, I actually did want to see Raiders of the Lost Ark or whatever, or Last Crusade. But like the tool that we have, but again, with anything in human history, we've also got it where it's such a powerful tool. But it's a bit like phones now. Phone addiction is not a myth. Phone addiction, social media addiction. And if all we're getting is these very myopic, almost like reduced down views of what is or isn't part of the world, the mental health of young women has dropped through the floor because of social media and expectations. I'm sure it's the same for young men as well.
Yep. It's the social media thing. I think it's amazing in a lot of respects. That's how we've connected. That's how a lot of my guests, that's how we talk. But the negative effects that it could have on kids, and I see some teenagers that I know are pretty depressed and stuff, and I think they feel a lot of pressure from social media, and this is something that our generation has never had to really deal with, So we don't even know how to tackle this sort of stuff and what the long-term effects are.
And I think it also applies to adults. Like, if you can't not look at social media, you're addicted. Not you, but all of us. Like,
No.
if you can't not look at Instagram, you're addicted. Like, all these things that we've got continuously going for our attention, and that's what's the most valuable commodity that we have, is our attention and our time, because time disappears very quickly, and before you know it, without sounding really negative, we'll be dead. We'll all die eventually. And to think, I should have spent more time looking at cat videos on Instagram. Shout out to all the cat videos on Instagram. It's like, no, like safety, a connection, experiences, seeing people, spending time with people, having laughs in real life is how we evolved as a species. And if we're constantly just spending our time looking like this, that's not real human connection, and it can make us feel so empty and lonely.
And the irony is, with all that stuff, is people are trying to create more content, which ironically what we're doing now, but what people are doing more stuff that the internet fuels the cycle that keeps going.
Yeah.
But as long as you're doing something creative and productive that is going to benefit people, it needs to come from the right spot.
I wouldn't have as much of a knowledge and understanding about physical, mental, social, economical health and the world without the internet. Like, I can go. This morning, I've now set up this. I have this thing where I just get a Google alert every time a new research paper comes up about a ketogenic diet and mental health. Right? That is an insanely positive thing to have, because I can literally just be. There's endless amounts of information out there. But again, like anything, the poison is in the dose. If I can get the right way around, the poison is in the dose. If you spend 20 minutes, half an hour, message some mates, again, Instagram is my main vice. It's like, message a few friends, have a bit of a laugh, share a video of like a car crashing or something like that. That's not always me. And then it's like, and then delete the fucking app. And people go, I don't know how you delete the app. It's like, otherwise, that app they are built to draw you in and just continuously get your attention. And that's not paranoia. That is literally a fact.
Yeah.
And I have it. I notice. I can normally see it as a bit of a sign. If I'm overwhelmed or feeling quite depressed, I end up spending a lot more time on social media, because it's also escaping reality. You're essentially living in almost like a different dimension. And I'm sure you've had it as well, where you go, holy shit, I've been looking at Instagram or something for 2 hours. What the fuck am I doing?
What a waste.
Read a book.
But that's one thing that's awesome with doing these chats, right? Is because everyone turns their phone off and we are disconnected from the fucking internet, and we're just talking, and it's just that stuff doesn't exist, which is like a refreshing thing I get to do every couple of days. Talk to people and forget about the fucking internet.
And you're not having the benefit of seeing my facial expressions or eyes, whereas I do. But that's the thing is that I don't think people get is that, without nerding out too much, is that we get different neurotransmitters and hormones released when we're interacting with people in person. That's what we evolved doing as humans. We didn't have, unless I've really got the history stuff incorrect, we didn't have social media and tablets 1,000 years ago. Safety, connection, you've heard me say that many times. Safety and connection is like a foundational thing of human beings, because we're so sociable. We work together as a team. But if you're not actually getting that interaction, just texting someone is not the same. Now, texting is really useful. It's like, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Cool, see you then. Boom. But if all you're ever doing is, and there are some people, which is, I just find bizarre, but, there's many weird and wonderful things in the world, who literally hardly interact with anybody.
Which is super sad.
And that's so socially isolated. And then we're like, oh, well, that must just be because it's a dopamine imbalance. It's like, there's so much to that biopsychosocial model of health. And health isn't just the absence of disease. It's actually feeling like I've got purpose. There's a Japanese psychology concept called ikigai, which is essentially having purpose in your life. And why that's so important, because a lot of us just feel really lost.
Yeah, I think it happens a lot with older people. When you've got an older person that has to look after their partner or their cousin or their whatever, and then that person passes away, the other person loses their purpose, and you find that they often pass away pretty quickly after that.
Yeah.
And that's it's got to be an actual thing that happens.
And that's where this is again, I'm an ideas person. I don't normally actually make them happen. But one of the things that I think is really important is when people get to retirement age, often they have mental health and cognitive issues really badly because their routine, their schedule, their thinking. And that's the thing, is I'm not saying don't retire, but when I'm going to actually retire, I'm not going to completely stop doing anything. Also, it would be really helpful if people had an occupational therapist, because then someone can actually find purpose. Someone can actually find something to do, because we need a routine and a schedule. Otherwise, people then just wither away and pass away and become really frail. And yeah, it's just so sad.
Talking about overhauling a lot of systems, but I'd like to overhaul the whole work retirement system, because what a fucking bizarre backwards thing that you work for 70 years and then you take it easy and then you die in 10 years. That makes zero sense to me.
Yeah.
And I may not make the best financial decisions like within this podcast and whatever, but I'm enjoying my fucking life, man. I'm not going to wait till I'm 70 then to kick back, you know?
No. So I read a really, you know, one of those books, maybe you read it or whatever, that changes your life. And it's the 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss.
Yep.
And that's all about working less and making more money. Now, I haven't actually got to that point, but one of the really important parts was like, don't wait until you're in your 60s or 70s to enjoy your life. Like, work is important, but fucking hell, time goes so quickly. You don't want to be waiting until that point. You might get run over by a fucking bus next week or get really ill. Like, money is important, but work out ways to work less. And I think through COVID, one of the good things that did come out of that was a lot of us just went, hang on a fucking sec.
Yep.
I mean, I started my own therapy business. I started Toy Division because I was like, fuck working for other people and fuck working 50-hour weeks and constantly just be stressed. Like, get to the weekend, you can't even enjoy your weekend because you're just so tired from work. What a waste of a life.
Yeah, and that it's like people work Monday to Friday, they get to Friday, they go out, have a few drinks, whatever. Then Saturday they're like, oh yeah, and then Sunday you're like, oh, I got to work again Monday, and then they're nervous about that. That whole, I think it's Taylorism or whoever invented the 7-day week and the 5-day work week. I think that's fucked. That's got to be overhauled. That's not healthy, you know?
And I think what you're doing with this podcast and what you're doing in general is really positive, because you obviously want to do it and it's got a lot of purpose for you, and you're actually bringing people on, in the technical term is the long form conversations, which is so interesting because we're now in a world where the tech stuff is so advanced beyond our wildest dreams. But what people actually really want to have is they want to hear conversations.
Yeah.
And they want to hear about people's life experiences. And you're like, but that's just like hearing people talk or watching people talk. It's like, but that's what we want as humans. We always have done, we always will do.
I'm a boozer and I love drinking, but I spend a lot of my time at pubs and that is because, okay, take the alcohol out of it. You're meeting people, you're associating with them, you're learning. I've met some of my best mates at the local pub and we're still friends to this day. You know what I mean? People that I go to their weddings, all sorts of shit like that.
Yeah.
And I think that is an extremely important place in a small community, especially in the inner city area where people don't have a lot of space. They may not even have a proper lounge room or whatever. They go to the pub. That's like their place to go and connect. And we're losing a little bit of that with this technology shit as well, you know?
100%. And again, I'm English, so obviously the pub is like, it is a huge part of someone's social well-being to interact with people. I think one of the things which hopefully might change is there might be alternatives, because, you know, I love going to the pub. I love having a pint. I'm just, now that you've mentioned it, it's just in my mind. I'm like, I could really nail a pint. I might call
We might do one after this.
But again, for people that are struggling with drug and alcohol problems, it then means that often they've got no alternative. And I think that if there could be somewhere which maybe for a period of time, because I've had many periods of time where I don't drink alcohol, having somewhere to go which is not just, because it's so hard to not drink.
Yeah.
It's like you're white knuckling it. And shout out to every single person that I know that might watch this. Actually, shout out to everybody that's given up and gone teetotal. The respect I've got for people that go completely teetotal from drugs and alcohol is beyond belief, because I've tried many, many times. But wouldn't it be nicer if we just had maybe a place where you can go and get really good food and socialise, and it isn't just all based around alcohol? because it's so difficult to stay sober when you're surrounded by alcohol.
Yeah, but it is what you make it, though. There's a lot of alcohol-free beers now, so I think the way that people and society think of people that don't drink now is definitely changed in the last 5 years,
definitely.
incredibly.
Yeah.
And I think, like, people now, there's no stigma. I'm sure there's people that go, "Oh, have a beer, don't be soft," but the stigma isn't there anymore, and people, I think, are a lot more respectful for people that choose not to booze.
Yeah, I think that's something which, and now also the stuff that's coming out about the fact that, there was this idea of 1 to 2 drinks a week. It's really healthy. No alcohol is good for you. It's really bad, but at least having the knowledge and the understanding, now it's not just like, oh, well, if you don't drink, you're weird. It's like, if you're making that decision, you can now say to someone, I'm not drinking at the moment for my physical and mental health. And people go, all right.
Yeah.
Rather than, what the fuck's wrong with you? Have a drink, you weirdo.
Yeah. I think, there's so many people that I've had on this show that are probably my age or maybe a little bit older that are just choosing to live a sober life, and they might have, had issues in the past, and now that's becoming normal. I can go out, hang out with dudes, and like 4 out of 5 of them just don't drink anymore.
Yeah.
That's cool, because we never had that in the past.
Yeah, it was either you hid away, and shout out to the people that I know that are have been going through some really tough times. Like, I've got a mate who he basically just stopped drinking, started eating like whole food, so non-packaged, basically eating meat and vegetables, stopped drinking, focused on exercise, focused on sleep. And it's a really rough thing. He's gone through a really rough period of time, but things are getting better. And I think that changes from like, if you just eat healthy, do exercise, everything will be fine. It takes time, but it can be a really powerful way of improving your physical and mental health.
I agree 100%. I think that some people can dive in too deep with that sort of stuff, and then it becomes detrimental. Really, yeah. I think. Okay, so you have mentioned Toy Division, which is your main labour of love, and that how it's evolved, because now you do focus a lot on mental health. But when it started, what was the brainchild behind that, and tell us how it evolved.
Okay, so like I said, outside of this recording, I found podcasts probably in like 2015. I was very late to the podcast world. I'd heard of the Ricky Gervais podcast. A lot of people have. Hilarious. That's still funny. And again, people go, Ricky Gervais is terrible, but whatever.
I think he's one of the funniest bastards ever.
Hilarious. And also has an accent that I really recognise from growing up, because he grew up in a similar area to me.
Yeah.
So with Toy Division, I'd had the idea of wanting to do a podcast because I had many people, because I got really addicted to podcasts. I on average, listen to about 6 or 7 hours of podcasts a day.
Wow.
And that can be going to and from sessions with clients. Again, I don't just listen to hip-hop graffiti ones. I listen to really broad, because essentially I'm like a giant sponge for information and knowledge, and I just love and always have loved learning. And with Toy Division, it kind of came from a lot of people like, you should do a podcast, you can chat and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like a never-ending talking machine. And then I kind of thought, well, what about if I just record? Because it was when COVID started, everyone was using Zoom. Mm-hmm. And then I found you could just press a button and it recorded the audio, and you could just separate that from the video. And I thought, well, I'm feeling pretty lonely and isolated at the moment, because you're not allowed to fucking socialise with anybody, but that's a whole other argument as to why or if that was beneficial, whatever. And then I just realised I could quickly edit it. And again, I've rapped for many, many years, learned how to make beats, got all the equipment, and then it's just sat in a cupboard. And I had GarageBand, I know how to do basic editing, and I just started recording conversations with people that I knew. And
with their permission, though.
Yeah. So we do it. I wouldn't do it by surprise. And it was like mates basically at first. And like I was saying to you earlier, it was very much about those first experiences of painting. It's like where you did your first piece, what was the first spray paint you used, what's some dumb shit that you did. Because I think that's what I find hilarious about graffiti writing culture. There's this like, I'm a fucking staunch, tough writer, and I fucking can just paint burners. But we all start off really shit. It's like people that rap or make beats or break or whatever, you start off really, really shit.
You have to.
You have to. You can't start really good. And anyone that goes, I've just started off good, they probably practiced, especially with like graffiti, they probably sat at home sketching for like 10 years or just were like, oh, yeah, this is my first ever piece. And then over time, it just got, because I've always had this fascination with it being a worldwide culture. And I'm lucky to know people from the UK, from Australia, different parts of the world. And thankfully I had a connection, someone who used to work for Montana, Germany, who really helped me out with some ideas and some people to talk to. So it was like someone from France, someone from Germany. And then over time, I just kept putting out episodes and I've always been fascinated with the stuff that goes on behind the scenes of certain types of graffiti media. So like who makes the magazines, who makes the podcasts, who makes the documentaries. And I've always thought that it's really interesting hearing those stories. So it's like someone who made, Joe Blogs magazine, that's not a real magazine, just a random magazine. Who made it? What motivated them? What were the pros? What were the cons? And why did they do it? And what could I learn from that? Because again, I'm like, I just want to learn from people. I'm like, yeah, tell me what to do or tell me what not to do. And then over time, I just realized that people were also resonating. Because I remember putting out an episode called Everyone Has Mental Health. So it's like episode 20 or something. And I thought, well, I know all this stuff about physical and mental health through my job and through my absolute passion about lifestyle and all that type of stuff. And I thought, well, why don't I put an episode out? And I remember being really anxious about like, oh shit, I'm talking about mental health and I'm putting this stuff out there. The feedback I got was just amazing. And it wasn't just from writers. It's people that were like non-writers, like, oh, I don't do graffiti, but someone sent me a message, or friends I hadn't spoken to for like 15, 20 years. I think it was done at a time, not intentionally, where the whole world had been turned like upside down. Like someone had got the whole, I heard the term the other day, the snow globe of the entire planet, and someone had just gone like that. And that was COVID. It was like we couldn't really go anywhere. A lot of us couldn't go anywhere. It really felt like the world was collapsing in on itself. And I think, shout out to anyone that's given me this positive feedback, but so many people have gone, thanks, mate. You really helped me during COVID because you gave me some sort of something to focus on, because I was churning out episodes as well. And over time, it's then become, I've made a couple of magazines. I've made a couple of, I've done one t-shirt run. If anyone's interested in more t-shirts, there is some more coming out in February 2024. So keep your eyes peeled on that. And then also it's then just been a really good way of making connections with people, because I've met so many people and had opportunities to go, like coming here today and doing this podcast. Amazing. Doing the mug off, which I did the other day. Shout out to the mug off guys. I'm then seen as like, I'm a celebrity, but I then have it where people go, oh, this is Mr. TD, or people meet me in real life and they go, oh, you're the guy that does Toy Division. And I've never wanted it to be about me. And that's why someone was joking the other day. She'd be like, the bally comes off and then another bally and then another bally. And it's always like a Russian doll. And then I was like, well, wouldn't it be hilarious if I took one bally off and another bally and then it's just like Skeletor's head. And they're like, that's really messed up. I was like, oh, okay, I've gone too far.
But so you never, until that point, you saw it was just about graffiti, and that pivoted to more about mental health.
Yeah.
And then I guess it opens up the floodgates, because people that are consuming this are thinking, okay, this guy has our interest at hand. And then I guess people start DMing you, and then it kind of snowballs from there.
Yeah. And I think I was also going through a serious mental health period at the time. Like at the beginning of COVID, my mental health just dropped through the floor, and I actually did a suicide. Well, almost did a suicide attempt at the time. And I remember just being like, because it was almost like something without me knowing what had happened. It was all, again, I'm a bit weird about this collective consciousness sort of thing. I really like the concept. It almost felt like everyone just went, oh shit. And that snow globe. And then I realized that I was really suffering, and I bet there was other people out there really suffering. Like all my almost invisible social buffers to mental health, like being able to hang out with mates, to have a chat with mates. Again, we had Zoom and we had fucking FaceTime or whatever. That was still there, but that's not the same as human connection. That's not the same as spending time with mates, going out, being able to go outside, pop down the pub, have a pint with some mates, go out for a meal, see your family. And it also did feel like, for many of us, I think it was like it was a terrifying situation because at the beginning it was like, oh, holy shit, this could be the end of everybody because the media was pushing it really, really harsh and really, really hard. And I then realized that maybe me talking about mental health might be helpful for people. And I actually expected some real pushback. I expected some really negative, like, oh, you fucking, what are you talking about?
Because the graffiti communities can be a bit staunch, you were worried about that?
I thought so, yeah. But as it turned out, the positive feedback I've had is just, it's so humbling over and over again. And I just feel like any single person that's ever sent me a DM or, like, I've had people in the street just like, randomly. I was out one night and some young dude walked past and he was just like, hey, oi, you the guy that does Toy Division? I was like, yeah. I was like, oh shit. I'm always thinking it's going to be some sort of beef. And he's like, you really helped me during the lockdown. You really saved my life. Thank you so much. And then just walked off and I was just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Because like we were talking earlier, is like you put the content out there. You don't know who it's going out to. You don't know who it's maybe just even like a couple of seconds of content might help someone to think there is hope. There is like a way of getting out of this situation, or actually there is someone else out there who's been through what I've been through. Because often we can feel like I'm the only person that's like feeling anxious or overwhelmed or struggling with sleep or can't stop drinking or fucking smoking meth or whatever. But it turns out that those other people's stories or other people's insights can be really, really beneficial.
Yep. And did you then find yourself in a scenario where you think, okay, this has to just focus on mental health? Did you think that that was detracting from the graffiti side and the original intentions?
To be honest, I wish I would like to say I had a plan. I literally have just been absolutely winging it. Mm-hmm. And I'm one of those people, I'm like, what about this idea? I was like, I want to celebrate the seminal graffiti documentary Style Wars. Why don't I do a 60th episode all about Style Wars? I'll get someone on who was in Style Wars. Then that fell through. And then I ended up getting someone who was involved in the remastering of the original footage for the 20th year or 25th anniversary, showing that they did. And again, it was just like, I just have these thoughts. I'm like, wouldn't it be good if I talked to that person or someone who did this or someone who did that? I also got really inspired by, I think it was a Tim Ferriss podcast. I think it's David Cho or something. Again, I'm probably getting anyway, I heard him talk, because again, like I said, I consume a lot of podcasts, so I might think it's this podcast. And this guy was saying he did 200 something episodes and he just wanted to make the weirdest podcast about the weirdest content. And he did, I think he had like, he said this guy did an episode where he recorded it with a butt plug in his mouth so it would sound like he was sucking someone off for that. And again, I'm not going for that, but I was like, that's some weird shit, because again, there's this idea that podcasts have to be this kind of like interview style or one person talking. But I've got some ideas for like, wouldn't it be dope if you could record someone via Zoom when they're painting a trackside, or interviewing someone when they're, and this is very unlikely, painting like a commuter train or a freight, like that experience where you're interviewing or at least hearing someone talk, because it's such a amazing medium where you could basically do anything. And I think a lot of people think, oh, it needs to be just an interview. But again, that's what inspires me to keep going with podcast stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is somewhat of an interview, so I don't want to disappoint you with that, though, man.
Why have I not got a butt plug strapped to my mouth? Fuck's sake.
You might under the belly. Who knows?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but I do enjoy this kind of. There is a space for all of that sort of stuff, like different sort of shit. I enjoy this sort of stuff personally, and I've always been, and I'm guessing you're coming from the same school of thought. You make content that you enjoy to consume, and then if that's the case, then hopefully there's other people out there that consume it also.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that, like I was talking to you about earlier, just knowing what's going on behind the scenes, like who made that magazine? What's the story behind that magazine? What's the story behind that website? Because often people consume content, they just consume it, and they're like, well, it's fucking shit. Why is that not every week? You said it was going to be fucking every week. Who did that? Oh, I didn't like that interview. That person's a dickhead. Without any realisation that it takes so much time and energy.
Yeah,
and if it's not time and energy, it's fucking money.
Yeah.
And people go, I remember a really episode a long time ago, the What You Should Do Brigade. Like, oh, what you should do is you should have this person on, or what you should do is have this, or what you should do is make that. If you want to do that, why don't you go and do it?
Yeah.
If you want that, oh, why is there not more legal walls in my area? Go and fucking sort out some legal walls yourself. Stop getting someone else to do something. Oh, why don't you do an episode with blah, blah, blah. I've had so many people message me going, oh, you should do an episode with blah, blah, blah. I'm like, thanks for your message. I don't say it, but I think, fuck off. It's my podcast. I'll have whoever I want it to be on there. Don't tell me how to make the content. If you want to do that, go and make your own content. It just takes time, and people want someone else to do
what they want. Yeah.
Yeah, I want this, so you do it for me. Well, how about you take the time and energy to do it, and then you'll realise it's really hard work.
Yeah. and it's thankless a lot of the time as well. You're doing it, and then yes, I think it goes with the territory when you put yourself out there on the internet that people are going to tell you what they think. I get that. But I think personally, from my point of view, I've found much more positivity than negativity, you know, and that's what makes it worthwhile.
I'm just so English that I always revert back to fucking whinging. Whinging poems.
So obviously therapy and art are two different things, but they can be the one and the same with the art therapy. People, I think, that have been painting graffiti obviously have figured this out a long time ago, that it's therapeutic, but I think the medical sort of stuff is finally catching up, and it's cool that there is now avenues for people to do that stuff, and even with some sort of like proper processes behind it, not just painting a wall, but thinking, okay, this is therapeutic, and how can we use art to help us fucking feel better about ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you were saying, people know that it helps. People know in their subconscious or their soul that doing something creative is really beneficial. I mean, why do people make music? Why do people rap? Why do people paint? Why do people dance? Why, you know, from our evolutionary biology, that's what we used to do. We used to dance and, you know, scribe the inside of caves, and we used to tell stories, and we used to sing and all these things. And then it got labeled as art. It's like, when did it become art? And people that follow me on Instagram will see that I've kept putting this thing from a podcast, I can't remember what it's called, but it's about this book that's just come out, and I think it's called Your Brain on Art, and it's about neuroaesthetics, and it's a book that's just come out, and it's all about the now, because the neuroscience and the science is catching up with why certain creative activities are good for how we feel, and it actually influences our physical and mental health. The problem is that it's seen as like fluffy bullshit for a long time with the medical model. Well, what are the neurotransmitters and what are the tests that we can do? It's like that holistic viewpoint of a biopsychosocial model is creativity has been part of our human expression for hundreds of thousands, millions of years in some kind of form. And when I go out and paint, often I feel so good afterwards. Not always, if it's in a situation where maybe you haven't got 100% permission, because I'd never do that anymore. That's completely theoretical. It can be stressful, but going out with some mates, catching up with some mates, like painting, just all that stuff, and there's that social connection. I think a lot of men or blokes or people who identify as men, whatever, we don't really feel comfortable talking about our feelings because there's many reasons as to why. There's a lot of evidence and research into actually doing things with people is then how you open up and actually talk. And that's the kind of a foundational concept of occupational therapy, because doing is both the means and it's the end. So it's not doing stuff makes your mental health better, but it's actually your mental health is made better by doing activities, and it feeds into itself. And having it where it's a never-ending like giver of stuff as a hobby. It's like I could spend all day doing graffiti stuff, like painting, looking at photos, going and checking out places to paint, talking with people about it, listening to content. We're so blessed and lucky to have all this content and stuff, but you can also have it where it becomes your entire life. And I think that's where it can then, it's like the poison is in the dose. It's like some people become so hardcore writers, all they do is paint all day, rack paint, stay up at night, really fuck up their mental health. And then I think a lot of people can have it where they're like, well, where do I go from here? Like, where do I move on from, I've done 1,000 trains. That's a lot. 100 trains. Well, where do you go on from there?
It's, I think with blokes' mental health, and we're only getting to the point where we can talk about it now, but I was talking to a mate about it yesterday. It's pretty, like, a lot of guys, and we're in our 40s now, people getting divorced and that sort of thing, and that takes a huge toll on a lot. Like, I'm not discarding that the females don't cop it, but I think a lot of the guys get pretty lost when they end up getting divorced, and I'm starting to see that happen with some of my friends. And there hasn't been a generation that have really talked about that. People just had to figure it out for themselves. So it's cool that we're at a point now where we can actually talk about that and realize these people are struggling. You know?
Yeah. And I think the next, because we're at a starting point, I think is like, okay, mental health exists. Yeah, no shit. Because I think a lot of people thought mental health was like you're either psychotic or you're normal. And there's such a wide variety of reasons and component parts to that kind of spectrum of complete insanity and sanity. Because even the people that are sane, I'm often like, are they actually, or are they just fucking white knuckling?
What is the definition of sanity, though?
Yeah, but this is the starting point. And we've still got a long way to go, because being able to be like, oh, you're having a tough time, that's cool. But when someone's really struggling and they don't want to talk to you, maybe you'll call them up and they just go, oh, fuck off, leave me alone, and be like, well, what's this fucking problem? That can be a real sign where someone just needs someone to be present, not physically, but at least knowing there's someone there can offer that lifeline. And it can be a text, it can be a phone call, just checking in with a mate, maybe someone who's watching this now or listening to this or whatever. Just think, oh, I haven't spoken to matey for a week. Maybe I'll drop him a text, give him a call, see how he's doing. And even if they don't respond, even if they go, oh, fuck off, leave me alone, stop hassling me, knowing there is someone there can be that lifeline. Because my biggest thing is that so many of us, especially graffiti writers, it's like, oh yeah, I'm representing my mate who passed away, much love, brother, all this stuff. And that's amazing, that's fantastic. But at the time, were you really there for that person? Were you really a lifeline? And I'm not criticizing and judging people, but I'm just saying, like, be there for mates. Try and think, just because you can't understand how they feel or what they're saying, that doesn't mean you need to dismiss it. Because we're still at a stage where it's like, well, what do you mean you're fucking worried about your mortgage? Get over it. If fucking you got loads of money, you got a nice house, don't worry about it. Just forget about it. That kind of mentality where that's very a male way of doing things. It's like, do this or don't do this, or well, I think like this, or this is my experience. Everyone is so different and everyone's experience of the world is so different. Try not to be this whole thing of like, well, I'm not bothered by that. So why the fuck are you bothered by it? Have a drink, shut up. Yeah. And I think that's the next level we need to get to, is being able to have that empathy and getting into someone else's shoes, even just for like 10, 20, 30 seconds, 10 minutes is really, really important.
So what would you suggest somebody does that is struggling? What's the first step? Just talking to someone is the first thing to do, right?
Yeah. But I think sometimes that can be really, really hard. Like periods of time where I'm really struggling mentally. I'm having, because I had all the way through COVID, and probably for a period of time, I had like suicidal thoughts probably every day for about 5 years. Wow. And I'm now out of that, thank God. And the irony is I was a therapist helping people with their physical and mental health and running the podcast. But suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation, I really struggle to find. I can't stand talking to people. If I'm really struggling, I just shut myself off from the world. I think everyone then panics because normally I'm quite sociable. But I think the main thing, and this is really hard to be aware of, but one thing I heard described really well was, it was a podcast with someone by the name of Ruby Wax, who's a comedian. I think she's from North America, but spent a lot of time in the UK. She was describing how her mental health was really poor at times, or has been for many years. One thing that really stood out in my mind was that it's almost like you're approaching a storm in a ship, and you're like, okay, I know this is coming, or it might take you by surprise or whatever, but batten down the hatches, do what you need to do to reduce the storm. It doesn't mean you can stop the storm, but very often the storm will pass. And I think just having that awareness for many people, my wonderful wife, shout out to my wife, she had it many, many times when we first met where she would get really overwhelmed and be like, well, this is it forever. I'm going to be mentally ill forever. And it's like, we have these like peaks and troughs. And I think just having that awareness, that doesn't mean it's going to fix anything, but that awareness also really, really try and, as much as possible, think about the basics. So sleep, try and eat well, try and manage your stress. So do some breath work, do some meditation, go for a walk. And the exercise is really, really important. Just try not to over-exercise, but try and cover those foundational things about your physical and mental health, because there's no biology without psychology and vice versa. But just trying to think about, okay, what can I do? And also realize if you're really struggling, it's really beneficial to just say to people, if you feel comfortable, and even if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to go out and still socialize. You can spend time just at home doing fucking nothing. If you want to sit on the sofa and watch The Sopranos from the beginning again, like I am for at the billionth time, and just eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream, that's probably not beneficial for your blood sugar with the Ben and Jerry's, but having time to really just be, it's okay. You can spend time to relax, because we're often taught you've got to go, 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 go. And then we just burn ourselves out. And that's when we can get really, really mentally unwell. And I think over time, we can start to notice what things help, what doesn't help, and also just listen to Toy Division podcast when it restarts again.
Well, as we kind of are winding it up, let's talk about what's in store for the podcast coming up, because we're almost out of this year. So what's going to happen for 2024 from the Toy Division podcast?
Okay, so other than the magazines, T-shirts, barbecue, meetup things, and I'm going to be doing mindfulness meditation things on Zoom, because some people can't be in person. I want to create a place where people, because I'm going to hire, so shout out to shout out to Bad Apples and also Vandals for Charity for the donations, and everyone else that donated when I did a fundraiser. So I'm going to run some like cooking groups, just so people can be like, okay, what is actual healthy food, how food is medicine, all that type of stuff. The podcast itself is on hold until September 2024, but I am recording episodes. So like we were talking about off camera, off microphone, it takes time. And I don't want to have it where because I was having long periods of time with no gaps. So I'm recording it, editing it, and then from September 2024 onwards, there will be a Toy Division podcast every fortnight.
Okay.
And consistently.
I love your foresight. September 2024. I haven't even sort of figured out February.
Well, that's because I decided after episode 100 I was going to have a break, and that was in September 2023.
Okay.
And I was like, I need 12 months break.
Fair
But
enough.
like I've described, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the background, and I'm really hoping and feeling passionate that I can build a community, because I think the podcast is great, but that's just one part of what I really want to create. I want to create a growth mindset, positive, healthy, creativity, kind community of people, because then we can actually help ourselves as a group, and we can help each other, and that is the key. So I'm turned to a full tree hugger now.
So how would people be part of this community? Just start with the Toy Division Instagram? Is that how they do?
Yeah.
How do they be part of it?
Well, I guess to get a bit more of a vibe, even though I hate the word, dislike, I shouldn't hate it, to get an awareness, maybe go and listen to the podcast. It's on all like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, they call it now, iTunes, whatever. On all good podcast platforms, go and listen to some of that. Also, Toy Division 2 on Instagram. So that's Toy Division and then the number 2. Got locked out of the original one. So Toy Division 2. Please excuse every now and again it'll be like fucking vaccines this or whatever. So please don't get the thing I'm a conspiracy theorist, although conspiracies normally exist for a reason. And just keep an eye on that, because I think that's the best way to keep an eye on it. And if you want to come to one of the barbecues and you're in the west of Melbourne, it's open to all. The only thing I ask is that people just leave their ego at the door, or just don't come down and start trying to be a fucking dickhead, because it's not about that. It's not about coming down like high or drunk or just acting like a staunch dickhead. It's about actually being a kind human being to help each other out, because a lot of graffiti writers, a lot of people out there are really struggling, and we can actually help each other. And also, it's much nicer than just being a complete prick all the time.
I think it's a good rule for life in general. Just don't be a dickhead.
Yeah, leave your ego at the door. That's what the jam was all about in Sydney that I went to last weekend, was 50 plus writers all in one place. 10, 15 years ago, someone would have probably got stabbed. No, there was no fights that I know of. There was no beef. And the person that organised it just said, everyone is welcome. Just leave your ego and beef at the door. And I'm just like, that's a good thing in life, because otherwise, where does that end up?
Yeah.
Really?
Man, I really love what you're doing. I love that you're trying to bring some positive from something that potentially people see as a negative-ish space. We understand the positives behind it, but I think a lot of other people probably don't see that. So keep doing what you're doing, man, and I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me on, mate. And also shout out to you and everything you're doing. It's almost kicking me up the arse, thinking maybe I should do some more before September 24, but I've got to have it on hold.
Man, you got to have your break and think about your own mental health.
Good start.
Thanks, man.
3,000.